Okay, that's perfect. We are live. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to our third interview session for our vaccine access campaign. And today we have Tian Johnson, who is a queer African activist and member of the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19 vaccines. So perfectly fit to join us. And we have them here in their capacity as founder and head of the African Alliance. Thank you so much, Tian, for joining us today. And we would like to be talking about community engagement and vaccine access in Africa, as we know that African Alliance has done a lot of work in terms of community engagement. And regarding that, I understand community engagement to broadly mean the consultation and involvement of communities during a process such as maybe the COVID-19 vaccine trial or maybe the development. But what would that actually look like?
Mm-hmm. I mean, firstly, thanks so much for having us. It's always a pleasure to speak about the work that we do. The way we regard community engagement, especially in the context of COVID vaccine trials, is that communities should be involved from protocol design to post-trial access. And that means from the stage when the trial is being designed and thought about, even before the protocol is in place or finalized, communities should be engaged and engaged meaningfully in all of those stages. So from beginning to end, whether the trial is successful or not, communities and community engagement should be a meaningful part of the entire life cycle of that research process.
Thank you so much. And I know that you've touched on meaningful community engagement. So not just community engagement, which would then, I assume, like you're saying, require a bit more in-depth discussions about what is going on so that there's more trust. And regarding community engagement, Africa is obviously a very big continent, and the communities are very diverse. They differ quite substantially from each other. And how do we ensure that community participation is representative?
I think at the core of it is really identifying who is this community that we keep speaking about? And of course, the community might be those in your home, there might be those on your street, in your neighborhood block, in your school, in your church. But the community is also about the prison in your neighborhood. It's about the prison in your town. It's about the churches. It's about sex workers. It's about those who are not documented. So a community really is that entire ecosystem of individuals who form your surroundings and your environment and who potentially have a meaningful impact in your quality of life. But to recognize that broader definition of community, it's really important to recognize their humanity and your humanity in them. So we've constantly heard, especially in African Union deliberations around getting a vaccine to everyone, everywhere, free of charge, this whole concept of Ubuntu, right? And at times, Ubuntu is a really overused concept and to some degree has lost its meaning and its power. And so it's about understanding that I am because I am, but I am also because you are. And so what does that mean in the context when perhaps as the vaccine rolls out, we see those who perhaps have the luxury and the privilege of having a 13-digit barcoded identification document accessing a vaccine, while those who perhaps don't have that document cannot access a vaccine. So where does that play in? And so it's really about our broader conscious understanding of a community, that understanding of community that has been eroded of years and years and years of living in a highly colonized space.
Thank you so much, Tian. And I also really like the fact that you've touched not only on prisoners, sex workers, but it seems like undocumented migrants as well. We may be talking about refugees. And I'm aware that Africa Alliance is also going to be doing more work on that. So I'd like to also tell all the listeners to, keep an eye out for this kind of work that we're doing, and that African Alliance will be doing as well. And that makes me go to our next question. So with respect to the need for community engagement before and during vaccine trials, there have been some rebuttals from Big Pharma and some other institutions that this is an emergency. There's no time for community engagement. What do you make of this kind of rebuttal that I'm sure you've heard over and over again?
Absolutely. I think in the racist, imperialist nature that is pharma, who really exists to ensure profits for their stakeholders, I think at the core of that, communities need to be inflamed with passion and outrage. They need to find ways to mobilize to hold those in power account. And that's easier said than done. But what is a community who will perhaps only be on the receiving end of a COVID-19 vaccine at the end of 2023? What power do they have over one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies? Perhaps minimal. But what we've seen is that we've seen a desire and a hunger coming out of communities for our leadership and our government to have the courage to stand up for those communities, the courage to use the lived realities that those communities face to meaningfully negotiate. When we found out why we were paying nearly double the price for a COVID-19 vaccine than some European countries, the answer was the Europeans negotiated better. So where is the courage? Where is the courage of our leadership? Where is the community outrage at where we are right now in this plan? And while government has certainly made great strides, as we saw yesterday, the first 80,000 of 500,000 Johnson & Johnson free vaccine doses that were essentially leftover stock from the trials to bridge this gap, where are we seeing that spaces are being opened to a broader representation of civil society, to make sure that those communities are always at the center of the decisions that are being made? But like I said, it's easier said than done in a context where our leadership is to a large extent paralyzed by the signing of non-disclosure agreements. And so there has to be that balance between adherence to the non-disclosure agreements, which is problematic in itself. And so you begin to ask questions, what is the role of the African Union in ensuring an Africa-wide resistance and pushback against non-disclosure agreements? Because while pharma certainly has no shortage of customers for their vaccine, it will be a formidable stance, for example, for an organization like the African Union to take a stance on behalf of the people. But this is an African Union that has consistently failed to stand up for human rights. And so we as activists in civil society use our spaces and our platforms in the African Union, in the MAC, for example, to ensure that community voices are constantly being heard and constantly being paid attention to.
Thank you so much, Tian. And I've brought this up before. We at the ICJ have sent a letter to the AU asking for more transparency from different African states, different African governments regarding the information as to the vaccine. And I think what the ICJ is saying is very in line with what you've just said now, the call for more information, right? Just more information for everyone to know what's going on. And finally, that leads me to my last question, which I think is the meatier question, which I hope that you might take, most of your time explaining to us, because I'm very interested in this. So there's still some mistrust in various communities about the origin and efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines. I think we've heard of different rumors about the COVID-19 vaccine. The most popular one, I think, is the microchip in the vaccine. And I can't help but think that if there had been community engagement, maybe we wouldn't have so many people prone to believing misinformation, because they would have been involved in the process, they would have been informed of what's going on. But as of now, since the damage has already been done in terms of not having community engagement, how do we work to regain the trust of these communities? And not only as the state, but also as civic society and as individuals, who really believe in access to vaccine and that everyone should take this COVID-19 vaccine, and hopefully it's equitable, what we're waiting for, equitable access to everyone, right? So what do we do? How do we do the damage control to regain the trust?
I think the first thing is really to recognize the historical context, whether it's of vaccine research or any medical research. Medical research has not always had the best interests of communities at heart, especially communities of color. And so it is from that basis that we move from. We move from a position of inherent mistrust. So it's not vaccine hesitancy or anti-vaxxer sentiment out of nowhere. There's a historical context that situates that mistrust. And we've done very little to begin to address on a population level the mistrust and vaccine hesitancy in general. So I think a few steps should be done. The first is a call for humility in science. The need for scientists and researchers, no matter how many awards and accolades they might have, to stand up and say, as scientists, we are also learning on this journey. We've seen time and time again since the advent of COVID how rapidly the information has changed. We've gone from drug to vaccination. It's constantly changed who these interventions are working for, why they're working, how long do they work, now do I have immunity, do I not have immunity, what are the side effects here, I have asthma, can I take this vaccine, what is the Bill Gates conspiracy, why is Melinda Gates being characterized as the daughter of Satan, is there a microchip in the vaccine, is the 5G tower killing me and my family? All of these issues are rooted in trust. And so what we have to do is the hard work. And of course, the tragedy is that hard, long work, in most cases, falls upon the backs of us as civil society, who even before the pandemic were perpetually underfunded to do the work that we do anyway, whether it was in HIV or gender-based violence or access to justice. And so it's about identifying who are those people at a highly localized level that have integrity and that are trusted by communities. But more than that, are we doing the hard work to learn together? You know, for over a decade, we've been calling for increased funding for civil society to better understand the science behind research. And consistently, those calls have fallen on deaf ears. And with the advent of COVID, it was almost a realization of our worst nightmare, because now we had a moment where vaccine research and science was in the forefront and everyone cared about it. But you found a civil society either wanting or in desperate need of urgent technical skills building to, number one, understand the science, but in the second instance, be able to explain that science in a clear, concise way that communities understand. And that communities understand that it is not perfect, but the intention is sincere. The intention to bring an end to this pandemic that has paralyzed so many of our lives across the world, especially communities of color in the global south. The intention is to bring that to an end. And so I think once communities understand the intention of science, coupled by the world-class regulations that we have, for example, in South Africa, around ensuring vaccines are not only safe, but they are effective and they're of high quality. I think once that point is met and sustained through things like community radio and outreach and engagement with the faith-based sector and ensuring that no one is left behind. And that means bringing along LGBTQI communities. That means bringing along sex workers. That means bringing along an understanding why the good health of an individual in detention or in prison means the good health of communities. In a country where we have 360,000 people in detention cycling in and out of communities every single year. It's no longer just a prison issue. It's a community issue. It's no longer just a sex worker issue. It's a community issue. And so it's really about beginning to practice this, to a large extent, mythical concept of Ubuntu and taking it off the policy sheet or the headline into our lived reality. And that starts with our love for ourselves and our love for our brothers and sisters, irrespective of where they might come from.
Thank you so much, Tian. I really appreciate the way in which you discuss all of this, because it's a very relatable and very accessible way of understanding, which we really have realized with this pandemic. It's a group assignment, right? If we don't all work hard and win this, no one will. And pertaining to that, I know that Tian has an op-ed coming along. It's about holding people in power accountable for their words, which is extremely interesting and makes me think about maybe big farmers or politicians, the promises that has been made during the pandemic, before even or during vaccine trials, just promises that have been made to communities. And I hope everyone looks out for this op-ed. I definitely will. It sounds extremely interesting. Thank you so much, Tian, for taking the time to join us. I really appreciated having the time and a platform to talk to you. And we will be looking forward to a lot of the work African Alliance and yourself will be doing in terms of access to vaccine. And to our listeners, I'd just like to say that next week will be our last Facebook Live. And I think everyone should tune in. We'll also have another really interesting speaker, so maybe watch out for that. And Tian, thanks so much again for taking the time to talk to us. It's really appreciated.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Tanvir.
Pleasure.